Storage is very difficult. Now here in the US, we have the world's largest and most redundant natural gas distribution system. But we can't keep up with what is bubbling up out of shale oil wells as a byproduct. And so we have to flare it until we can build out the infrastructure. And you can see that from space. And it's the same in Texas. Now, that means that in the United States, and only in the United States, we price natural gas as a waste product. And that has changed a whole lot of things. So this is the Henry Hub Center in Oklahoma, where it's our primary natural gas pricing location. For those of you who have spent any time on the Gulf Coast, you will recognize these spots as hurricanes, because this used to be where we got most of our natural gas. So a storm would come through, we'd have to shut everything down and spend months repairing the damage. Until 2009, because in 2009, the bulk of the natural gas consumed in North America was sourced from a shale field. And it was primarily waste product. And so we got 12 years of low, cheap prices. Now, do we have anyone from Texas here? No one snuck in. Great security. Oh, one. Okay. Well, dude, you know what this is. This is what happened last January when Texas got cold. It got down to 25. And everything broke. Natural gas, oil, coal, nuclear, wind. So they managed to have everything break at the same time. And then this is what we're all bitching about right now. In September, we hit $9, which felt high, until you look at it in inflation index terms, in which case $9 is exactly the 50-year average. We are bitching about average energy prices. And this is what the Chinese and Europeans are dealing with. Marginal supplier sets the price, and they've all lost base load. This doesn't get better on anything less than a 3-year time frame, probably closer to 10. The macroeconomic conditions we're looking at this moment have a long road ahead of them. Because on the other side of this, there won't be a European or Chinese economy for demographic reasons. And the opportunities therein are massive for agriculture. This is where the word's phosphate comes from. It comes from the blue, it goes to the red. Now, you guys all, those of you who are in the ag sector, live in a degree of fear of African swine fever for good reason. But consider the process that you go through. You test your hogs, you send the test kit off to a lab, they call you with the results. You know, pretty simple 3-step process. Not in China. In China, you test the hogs, you send it off to a lab. The lab sends the results to the Chinese Communist Party. And then the CCP calls you to tell you what the results were. And so there hasn't been a single case of African swine fever in China for 3 years. Bullshit. More likely, they're on the verge of another significant outbreak the last time they had to cull 2/3 of their entire herd. They know that they are going to be facing a food crisis on top of everything else in the not too distant future. Now, in a Chinese world where pork is no longer available at scale, your only remaining crop that you can actually control is rice. And rice is the world's most phosphate-hungry product. And so China has always been the world's largest producer and exporter of phosphate. But a year and a half, they stopped exporting. They're still down by like 85%, and it's never coming back, folks. So we lost potash because of the Russians. We're losing nitrogen because of the energy crisis. And we're losing phosphate because of the Chinese. And none of these can be fixed on anything less than a multi-year time frame. And most places don't even have a backup. On the left, you're looking at row crop. On the right, you're looking at where the cattle are. And you'll notice they don't quite line up in most places. This is a feature of globalization. When the world became a single economic space, we all specialized. And so as a rule, we removed animal protein production from where the crops were because we needed that land to grow more value-added products. So for the most part, beef left the Midwest and went to the Great Plains. So the poo, the natural fertilizer, is no longer where we physically need it. Some version of this has happened on a global scale. Anyone from Wisconsin? Any cheeseheads? 2. Wow, tight security. This is Wisconsin. This is winter. Crazy idea. Winter is great for farmers. Not only do you get a break, you force the soil into a recharge cycle, aka free fertilizer. But this is the Cerrado in Brazil. Never gets a winter. There's no recharge cycle. You want to grow things, you have to wait for it to rain, you throw a chain around the tree trunks, you pull the vegetation up by the roots, and then you poison the land with lime for 3 to 20 years in order to get rid of the acid. And at that point, you get something with the consistency and the nutrient profile of beach sand. The entire interior of Brazil is basically growing food in a petri dish, and you have to add every scrap of nutrient. As long as the fertilizer is available, this is a rounding error, but that's not the world we're in. And there's a lot of countries in a similar situation. Anything in pink or blue, 40% or less of the land is under cultivation. And this is pre-industrial Africa in 1950. Here's where they were in 50 years later, because after 50 years of access to industrial inputs, they were able to increase their output by a factor of 5. We now get to do that in reverse. Give you an idea of scale. Here are the 3 nutrients: nitrogen, phosphate, potash. The big numbers on the left are the percentage that are imported. And you'll notice for the first 2, we really don't import much at all. We do import most of our potash, but that's mostly from Canada, so you know they are good for something. These are the only blocks that come from the conflict zone, from any conflict zone. That's manageable. Here's Brazil and Australia. The world's 2nd largest agricultural exporter is completely dependent upon international trade and no conflict. Oh, it gets worse because here's the stuff that comes from China, and here's the stuff that comes from the Persian Gulf. Isn't it wild that we all think of the Persian Gulf as like calm right now? It's like nothing's changed, it's just our attention is somewhere else. But yeah, that's gonna blow up in time. I hate this graphic so much. This is all of the world's agricultural caloric profiles. Anyone in deep blue or deep green is one of the world's major producers and exporters. Everyone else is a net importer. And if you break down the ability of fertilizer to get to where it needs to go, these are the countries looking at least a 40% reduction in their ability to grow the crop in the first place. Starting sometime next year, we are going to have food shortages that are multi-continental. And they are probably going to expand to the point that we're going to lose 1 billion people over the next decade. The supply chain system just takes too long to adapt. In this sort of environment, we are going to have a conversation in this country about things like the renewable fuel standard. Because if we have the ability to save a few 100 million people by growing more food for product as opposed to food for fuel, that's a discussion we need to have. We're not there yet, but expect this to be a really big issue, not next year, because next year is when the food shortages start, but the year after. All right, where do you guys fit in? 2 things to keep in mind. Number 1, Iowa is the only agricultural state in the United States where most of the income is from value added. You don't just grow the crop, you process it for either distribution within the United States or for export. I would argue there's not a lot that you can do to grow more, at least in relative to everyone else, because every inch of Iowa that can be under crop is. But you can always move up the value